Hello, parents. Welcome back to another day of raising our consciousness. So today we're going to try to get to the root of our fears. And I'm going to begin with a story. When one of my clients, Stuart, came in for therapy, telling me that he had really messed up with his kid, Tom, I knew it had to be serious because Stuart, he wasn't one of those fathers who readily accepted his shortcomings. In fact, I had been working on his controlling patterns for over 3 months, and he was still having a hard time accepting that it was he who was really a big creator of the disconnection he was having with his kid, Tom. So in this session, Stuart described how he had been helping his son Tom with his homework the previous night. Tom had just shown Stuart his math homework, and Stuart said that Tom had got all the problems correct. But that was the issue, Stuart said. Where was all the rough working out? Where was all the figuring it out? He was looking for Tom's solutions and how he was rough working it in the columns, but didn't see anything. So Stuart immediately reacted. He thought that Tom had cheated, had pilfered all the work from somebody else and just copied the homework. So he began to accuse Tom. Tom, being a 12-year-old boy, vehemently protected himself and stated that the reason there was no rough work is because he knew his work so well he could work it out in his mind. Stuart described what happened next as a complete rage show. Stuart said that he lost his temper at his kid. He thought his kid was being impudent and disobedient, and he ended up slapping his kid across the face, following which his son Tom locked himself in the room and refused to come out till the next morning and refused to talk to Stuart. This was now 24 hours after the incident almost, and according to Stuart, Tom had still not spoken to him. So Stuart was really crestfallen. He was really upset. He was really disturbed, perturbed. Why did he lose his temper in this way? And he knew that even if Tom had cheated, this wasn't the way to react. This wasn't going to bring about connection or transparency or honesty. So Stuart was really begging me, really asking me to help him to uncover his own patterns of anger. And I acknowledge that this was really courageous of him. I mean, how many fathers do you know who are willing to admit that they have an anger problem? So we were already in a good place. So when I began to uncover Stuart's patterns, I immediately could see that right beneath the anger was the proverbial fear. You know, fear is really the foundation of most of our reactivity, especially our anger and our control. In fact, the more anger and the more control we seek, it's really because we're so scared inside, we're helpless. Something is moving within us and we're feeling hopeless about it. We're feeling like we can't control it. So how do we show it in the external world? We get really dominating or really angry or really menacing. That's our way to mask our deeper fear. So when I began to explore Stuart's fears, I asked him to recount a memory with this kind of incident. Did anything like this happen in his life? And he immediately was able to tell me that all his life, actually, to the current day, he had been living with a fear of being an imposter. You know, when he was young, he used to cheat. He used to get good grades because of cheating. And he never actually got caught, Stuart. So he always felt like a cheater, an imposter, a trickster. And even to this day, even though now he's successful, he still carries that baggage of being an imposter. This is his fear of being found out. And so when he saw his son Todd possibly, perhaps, cheating or doing something that could look like cheating, he got so panicked for his son. Again, out of love, out of care, he actually allowed fear to override the love, and he began controlling and reacting to his son. Now, this is a classic example of how fear rules our parenting and gets in the way of truly connecting with our children. You know, when I explained to Stuart the emotional underpinnings of his reactivity, that fear was at the basis of his emotional meltdown with his son, then he began to understand more. He began to reveal how all his life, vulnerability and fear and shame have been emotions that he's been scared of. And because he's been pushing these emotions, these very painful emotions, back into the shadows of his psyche, he's covered it up through this very dictatorial, tyrant feeling, looking parent. That's the cover up. And for most of us, we have a cover-up. Fear is at the bottom, but we cover it up. We cover it up through addiction, through over-pleasing, sometimes through humor, sometimes through overworking. In all sorts of ways, we cover up that fear is at the root of our reactivity. I'm sure you too can think of countless occasions when your own heart was filled with fear and concern for your children or for your loved ones, but instead of expressing that vulnerable emotion, this great feeling of care, what did you do instead? You overreacted with anger or fury. And the classic example, of course, is when we're worried sick about our children when they don't come home on time. And then the moment we see them, instead of embracing them and enveloping them with love and devotion, what do? We overreact, we yell, we shame them, and we lock them up in their room. This is how we all are. We cover up our fear because fear is so vulnerable making. Now, our children, they don't experience our love. They don't see our intention. Instead, what they feel is the shame of our anger. They feel our rejection. They feel us shutting them down. They can't see the fear that's in the shadows of our psyche. There are countless occasions when we strongly believe that we know what's best for our children. But in fact, all of this knowing what's best is actually fear-based thinking. It's the fearful whispers in our head from our ancestors, from our uncles, from our aunts, from culture. It's this little voice that keeps telling us dramatic stories about how our children will end up on the streets and homeless and divorced and unhappy, that feed our psyche and they color our love. So instead of operating out of this place of boundless love, we clam up, we shrivel up, and we begin to control our children out of fear. The truth is that modern day culture, modern day parenting is a fear-based industry. It's predicated on fear. And fear is the underpinning of most of the institutions we put our children into. I mean, look at the education institution. Isn't it fear-based? The fear of underachievement or failure. Look at the marital institution. Isn't that fear-based? Fear of divorce or non-monogamy. Look at the religious institution. Isn't that based on fear? Fear of sin or sexuality. And so it is with the parenting industrial complex. It is also an institution based on fear. Fear of what? Fear of our children's unhappiness or lack of success. Now, without realizing it, this fear is so deeply ingrained in us, so much so that we wear it as a second skin. And we need to have compassion for ourselves because it's not comfortable living with fear. This is not our default reaction. It's something we've learned. It's the way culture has taught us to be. Culture has driven home this message that we need to raise a particular child. And if we don't raise a particular child in a particular way to be of a particular future, then we have failed as parents. So of course we live in this fear. We have imbibed all this pressure and expectation that culture has put on us. In fact, most of the traditional parenting books out there, open them and you'll see. They're filled with strategies on how to fix your kid, on how to create the kid, on how to modify the kid. They're called behavioral modification strategies. And nothing wrong with them, but we need to recognize that they are deeply influenced by control and fear. So if we accept that everything is predicated on fear, isn't it natural that we as parents then feel the need to obsessively micromanage every moment in our children's lives in order to protect them, in order to guide them and usher them out of the perils of this dangerous world? Our fear is taught. And I'm not talking about biological fear, because we are all primed with that biological instinct to survive. I'm talking about the psychological fears. It emerges because we are trained from an early age to not accept who it is we naturally are. See, everything comes down to that. We were not accepted for who it is we are, so we are forever living in fear of not receiving validation of our worth. We've all been raised on a diet to do in order to become, instead of to be, to discover who you already are. You see the difference in the paradigm? One says you have to do to become something worthy. And the other one says you simply have to unfold into who it is you already are. It is this striving to find an identity outside of ourselves through our work or through our labels or through our roles, our relationships, our career, that leads to a separation of our true selves. So the greater we identify with all these external roles, the greater will be the schism from our true self, and the greater will be the fear we abide by. So when we grow up with parents who are not attuned to our unique psychological blueprints, inevitably we're going to develop a terminal fear around our unworthiness. This core human fear can show up in several ways. It could show up as a fear of not belonging enough, not being lovable enough, maybe a fear of failure, of conflict. I bet you've experienced these fears in your own life. The truth is, every human being does. It's normal. However, when we're not conscious about these fears, then these fears can potentially become extreme and take over our lives, and then quite naturally dominate our relationship with our children. For example, if we always long to, say, belong in a group and fit in, and we're not aware that we have this inner fear and lack within us, then say if our child is not invited to the popular boy's birthday party, it's quite possible that our own fears from our own past will be put onto our children, and we'll meddle with our children's own experience of their life. So again, like with all of conscious parenting, if we don't stop and go to the roots of our fear, beneath every trigger, beneath every reactivity, we have to ask, what am I afraid of right now? What about my child scares me right now? And if we do not allow the space to go within and acknowledge those deep fears, then we're simply going to keep spinning, controlling our children, fixing our children, and getting more and more anxious. Unless we understand as parents how we have veered so far from our capacity to be in the present moment because of living in constant fear and anxiety, we will not be able to realign back to that present moment. So the thing about fear is not that we can eliminate it. We can't eliminate fear. So any book out there that promises to help you eliminate fear is telling you a lie. The thing that we need to do with fear is to not be afraid of it, to understand that fear is inevitable. It's a natural part of life. It can still be there. It can sit right beside you. But you have to learn to have a friendly relationship with fear where you befriend it so it's part of your existence without overwhelming your existence. The task is to understand your fear, to befriend your fear, and then to tame your fear. Through the taming of the fear, you transcend it. So for today's task, I want you to begin to reflect on your deeper underlying fears. So again, take out your journal. Let's do this exercise together. What I want you to first begin writing is about a memory of the last time you were really in conflict with your child. Think about it. A moment in your recent past where you were really triggered. So write that down. And now I want you to look at that incident, remember it, remember how you felt, and then I want you to go inward and introspect and ask yourself, what was I really afraid of that caused this strong reaction? You may have to ask the question multiple times in order to dig really deep until you finally understand what was the root of your fear. So for example, maybe you remember being in a heated argument with your child, perhaps because they refused to go to school or take the test that day. So then you would ask yourself, what was I fearful of that was showing up in my anger or my frustration? And maybe the answer would be, I was really afraid that my child would not pass the test. And then ask more. What is it about passing the test or not passing the test that you're really afraid of? And then you may have to ask yourself, what is it about failing the test that you're afraid of? Perhaps then your answer will be that your child will suffer in the future or that they will fail in their future educational goals. So then I'll ask yourself again, what is your fear about that? And in this way, you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into your fears. And as you go deeper, I can guarantee you that you will end up at the space of realizing that the fear you have for your children will ultimately be a fear for yourself. It will ultimately lead you to a place where you will admit to yourself, what I'm really afraid of is that I would have failed as a parent. And when you come to this place of realizing that the fear is yours, now you can begin to heal. So again, looking at our fears is kind of scary. Who wants to look at their fears? It's a formidable task. It's a daunting task. But as we look at our fears one by one in the mirror, we begin to see actually these fears are just coming from our past. They're coming from our parents, or they're coming from culture. Actually, there may be nothing to be so afraid of. And slowly, as you become friends with your fears and as you allow them to sit in your psyche instead of dismissing them, they actually reduce in their ominous threat to you. They actually shrink in their omnipotence. So, befriend your fears. And through this connection with your fears, you will not only learn to connect and know yourself better, you will also learn to befriend your children's fears. You won't be so afraid of their fears. And in this way, you will teach them that fears are nothing to be scared of. We can tame them, we can heal them, and we can evolve because of them. I will see you all tomorrow.